Today we're doing a little bit of a recap for the World Barista Championship in Melbourne. Welcome, my name is Patrik and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, you can see our setting is a little bit different here. We're in the April roastery and behind me is a setup for the World Barista Championship practice that I've basically been going through, right? So now we're about 3 weeks out from the actual competition and we thought we would give you a little bit of an update of one, how it's actually going, and two, what we're up to, right? For those of you that don't know, the Barista Championship or the World Barista Championship is kind of a simple competition. It's based around espresso. You brew 4 espresso for 4 judges, 4 milk beverages, and 4 what they refer to as signature beverages, right? So I'm gonna do after the competition what I've done previously when I've been competing as well. I'll do a little bit of a recap where I go through my score sheet and I share kind of the details of each beverage and so on, right? So that will be for a future kind of video. But just to get to kind of the basics here, what we're looking for is kind of an espresso in a more traditional sense of the espresso, right? So if you look at what we normally do here at April, it's a little bit of reformatting and trying to get an espresso that fits the structure that they are kind of looking for, right? Milk beverage, they made a lot more fun these days. You're able to basically change the volume of milk to whatever size you want to, almost. Still going to be based on a single shot of espresso, right? So basically you brew double, split that into 4 individual shots and then steep some milk with it, right? When it comes to milk, you have quite a lot of flexibility. You can use any kind of different cow milk pretty much. You can't use something that isn't cow milk. That is a discussion that is kind of being had at the moment, and we're trying to see, or we will see whatever the industry goes, right? Probably at some point there will be some kind of alternative milk. And then the signature beverage is a little bit of a tricky one. It's basically, you're supposed to showcase a new taste experience that still represents an espresso. So it doesn't have to be the espresso you serve, but most people always want to basically do a signature beverage based on that espresso, because in that score sheet, they're going to have to taste espresso to be able to score you high. And then you judge on kind of creativity. So what kind of ingredients are you using? How creative are they? And the synergy behind those ingredients and your signature beverage, which is arguably a very difficult thing to do, right? The context of that drink is A plus B equals C. So you basically want to take your espresso, add something else, and then create something different from that, right? So arguably kind of difficult. All of this is done within 15 minutes. And a very big part of the score comes down to, obviously, 1, is your coffee tasty? But 2, how well are you explaining what they're tasting? So taste experience is something that is very important here, right? And that's something that I've been practicing a lot on as well. I'm not going to go into too much details on what will happen in the competition. BBC will do a live stream of it and much better video than we can ever do. But basically the key thing here is to try to represent what am I up to at the moment in the coffee industry. I've always looked at competition as a platform to communicate where you are rather than trying to do what the system kind of requires of you, right? So I think the people that have been in the competition world for a long time have seen some kind of clear trends in terms of what does the people ending up in the final or ending up winning the competition do versus the people that don't, right? But again, the basic of what we're doing here in the competition is really trying to represent what are the producers we work with, what is the quality of coffee that we're into, and how can we fit that into a system that can then be experienced within those 15 minutes, right? And yeah, it's going to be a really interesting drive, right? One of the more challenging things is the fact that it's in Melbourne, so it's half across the world, right? So what I have behind me here and what we're going to look a little bit more in detail to is basically the actual setup, so you guys know what that is. So you're going to see 2 Mythos grinders, M75, which is basically the new model they have. It's not the gravimetric, this is the time-based one. And it's basically every 3 years or 5 years, not really sure, they're going to push new sponsors. And with new sponsors comes new machinery, right? So those of you that watched the competition before probably seen the EK43 on stage, which is what people used when Mark Koenig was the sponsor, right? So it's kind of interesting this year because the Mythos isn't as flexible, I believe, when it comes to single dose. You have the option when you compete to actually use a single dose grinder as well. I've chosen not to because I don't enjoy the quality that comes out of it. So it basically changes the game a little bit, right? You can see behind me here that there's 2 different grinders, and you're basically allowed to have up until 2. I guess technically, score sheet wise, you can probably squeeze in another one because you're allowed to have more electrical plugs, but I'm going to argue that most people will have 1 or 2, not more than that, right? The machine comes from Astoria. It's their new model Storm. What I have behind me here is actually a previous model, but it's basically the same. So it's set up to have the same pressure, same kind of temperature range that I can work with. And also then the same shower screens, which is very important. The basket size is 20 gram VST ridgeless, also really important. So what we've been trying to do here is to just make it as basically proper as possible in terms of what they're doing, right? That's always a challenge. Like espresso is a tricky thing to brew, and trying to do that half across the world is a big challenge, especially when it comes to, for example, roasting, right? So what I'm trying to do here roast-wise is that I'm bringing basically a few different profiles from a few different machines, both roasted here in Copenhagen, but also roasted in Melbourne, right? And this is kind of to try to figure out what is the tastiest way on that day with that setup, with that water, which might be the biggest challenge here because the water between Copenhagen and Melbourne basically couldn't be more different. Copenhagen has really bad water, Melbourne has really clean water. So there's going to be a difference there. And one of the challenges for the kind of water filter sponsor, which is now BWT, which is also new for this year, it used to be Pentair or Everpure, is how do we take a water that is really soft and actually add minerals to it to make it up to competition standard, right? Which is usually somewhere between 80 to 120. There's always fluctuation, right? But with competition comes basically a bunch of different challenges, and that's really the hard part. Making things tasty in general here in Copenhagen, it's difficult in itself, but the real challenge is really copy-paste, bring that to Melbourne. Melbourne has some additional kind of challenges, being that the custom clearance is not the easiest. There's a lot of stuff that you can't really bring in. Even coffee is a little bit of a challenge, even though it's possible. So that's kind of interesting. If we were competing in Europe, you could basically take whatever you want to, right? So there's always going to be challenges competing around the world, but that's also what makes it interesting, and all the competitors are kind of in the same boat. So a little bit about the competition itself, just to kind of simply explain. I'm not sure exactly how many people are going to compete. We're looking at 60 to 70 competitors, I think, from around the world. Last year in Milan was quite a small competition due to COVID, and now it's kind of expected to be back on track, more or less, right? We're basically, to be able to compete in the World Championship, you have to win your national. That's pretty straightforward. And then when you come to Melbourne to compete, potentially you have 3 rounds of competing. So first round, which is over 2 days, and then you have a semi-final, I think it's 16 people, and then you have a final that has 6 people, basically, right? So the ones that are doing this really well are going to do their presentation 3 times. With that, they're going to have 3 practice slots on each competition day, pretty much, right? So it's a little bit different from, for example, Brewers Cup, where the setup there is you can more or less duplicate exactly what you do in Copenhagen in Melbourne. And you can more or less practice at home, right? So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a change in vibe. It's going to be a more bigger, like a bigger scene, a bigger basically everything, right? So yeah, I'm quite excited. I'm sure we're going to do 1 or 2 more videos about this along the way. If nothing else, we're going to do videos after, right? Where we kind of sum all of this up. And as usual, try to share as much kind of insight and knowledge as we can. I myself, during the competition, will do a little bit of exclusive Patreon material, just kind of backstage behind the scenes to give you guys updated. So if you want to follow my kind of competition journey a little bit more specifically, you should sign up to the Patreon. And if you have any questions on the competition formats whatsoever, then just ask. We're always happy to share insights and knowledge. And if you are a barista wanting to compete and haven't competed yet, just compete. It's really simple. Everyone will kind of suck the first time they compete, so you might as well get that over with so you can start doing the good stuff, right? But in the end, competing is where you learn new stuff, it's where you progress, and it kind of forces yourself to be a little bit more connected with coffee, right? I do it myself for that very reason, because as someone that runs a company, you need an opportunity to kind of get grounded in the product and not to get far away from brewing and serving coffee, right? Which basically that's what competition is. The only difference between competitions and a normal setting is that in the competition, you have 4 amazing judges that are actually really excited to have your coffee, and you can serve it in whatever way you want to, right? So if you think about it, it's a pretty exceptional opportunity to actually just geek out completely, which in a normal coffee shop environment, we maybe don't really have, right? With that, we just want to say thank you for watching. Again, this was a little bit of a recap of what's coming up for the World Barista Championship. I am practicing with 3 weeks out, and it's going to be really interesting to see how far the format I'm doing can take me, right? So with that, thank you for watching. Sign up for Patreon if you want to see what I'm doing in Melbourne, and have a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.